All right, hello everybody. Welcome to UK CORRAL, the podcast that reviews every comic ever written by a writer from the UK. I'm your co-host Michael, and as always, I'm joined by Adamantium.
Crisis.
Okay. And unfortunately, our co-host, Nice Man, chose not to be with us tonight. He can talk about that next week. Actually, he kind of explained it on our last episode.
And I respect his decision. I mean, let's face it, what we're going to talk about is probably the definition of a polarizing book. Right. You know, no need to beat around the bush. We're talking about a four-issue, or a four-part series, we should say, which appeared in Crisis Comics, which was The New Adventures of Hitler, done by Grant Morrison and art by Steve Yeowell, I believe is how you pronounce the artist name.
Right. This is a comic I've heard about because I read this, what I consider legendary interview with Grant Morrison in Amazing Heroes around 1990. And this comic was covered in that interview. And I've always wanted to read it, but it's never really been reprinted anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So through the magic of digital thievery, let's be honest, we were able to track down a copy. And so we are reading this is actually... It first appeared in a comic called Cut, and then it was reprinted and continued and finished in Crisis in the UK.
And what's interesting, just sorry to cut you off, Mike. I just thought it was interesting because I was reading the background of this, and I think even the origin of this comic is fascinating because Morrison and Yeowell, they wanted to make this just a black and white for a comic run, but much more condensed, much shorter than the original was. So they actually went back and they did some coloration for the issues that were printed in Crisis, and they expanded it. So actually this is an expansion of what the original idea was going to be after all the controversy. And I don't know, I can touch upon it, but do you know much about the background or how this idea came about to do The New Adventures of Hitler?
I know a little bit only because I read it today. Apparently, there's a theory that's been put forth that's kind of been dismissed that Adolf Hitler spent some time in Liverpool before he went back to Germany and then began his political career. But there's really no evidence of it, but it's a theory. Because of that theory, someone published either a book or wrote a play as a joke, and it inspired probably two or three other people to do like kind of similar ideas. And so I think based on that theory, Grant Morrison, inspired by what was going on with Margaret Thatcher in the UK in the early 80s, decided to criticize some of her ideas by giving them, like kind of mixing them in with Hitler's ideology and then just spinning it into the story. That's all I know about it.
Well, I think that's basically the crux of the origin. And, you know, this wouldn't be the first time we've looked at a story by Grant Morrison in their early career that is very critical of the rising tide of the right in the UK, along with Thatcherism. This comic gives an interesting context, though, for how Thatcherism itself may have been kind of an inevitable conclusion given the influence of what happened in Germany and during the Second World War. And likewise, how what happened with the Third Reich may have been an inevitable, I guess you could say, conclusion of what happened after British imperialism. And there's a lot of themes talked about in here, which made for a surprisingly rich read. You know, before we get to any sort of summaries of the issues, I want to say it would be very easy when you hear the concept of this book to dismiss it as an attempt at shock value, to simply say, oh, it's someone who's being edgy. They're writing a story about Hitler where they're the main character. Of course, it's going to be some gross narrative that doesn't really have any literary merit or value. And yet there's a lot of thought put into this about the nature of fascism, about the nature of how generationally these tensions between nations engender a type of frustration that leads to the ascendancy of right-wing politics. And it's a lot more subtle and nuanced than I thought we were going to read. I was expecting something that was a little bit more of shock value, but I should have known, you know, my favorite Grant Morrison would have come across, you know, such a good story point and make something much more mature and profound out of it. So rather than get your hackles up about it, people, This is not a book that is condoning Hitler. This is not a book supporting the ascendancy of the right wing. This is very critical of it and a very interesting and I think challenging read. And I just want to leave it at that before we actually get into the issues.
That's a great point because um, I don't ever think of Grant Morrison as a writer that just writes shocking to be shocking, the way people have accused Mark Miller or even Garth Ennis of being. But this comic was far more, I guess you could say, nuanced and political, like than I thought it would be. The absurdity that we're going to talk about is kind of what I thought it was going to be, but I didn't realize there'd be so much politics woven into it. And it has a very clear mission, I think. But we'll talk more about that as we go. But I gotta say, even just looking at this cover, the seriousness and the quality of this art, in contrast with the absurdity of what happens in the story, is, in my opinion, just golden. Starting with this cover. But yeah,
it's great. Yeah, it's almost like a GQ cover in a way, and I think the absurdity of that contrasts really well. The only criticism I'll make of the art is that I think sometimes the covers for these issues, when they relate to the new adventures of Hitler, sometimes get a little bit too absurd, where it almost comes across like it will be a farcical comedy. And while there are those elements, it's actually a lot darker and a lot more serious than what is, I think, depicted or implied by those covers, particularly with the third issue. We'll talk about that one when we get to
sure.
it. But I do like the contrast with what we're getting with this kind of, I guess you could say, aesthetically pleasing and yet self-serious cover compared to what we're going to get in the story itself.
Right, right. So, and you can, yeah, you can see my my screen here, so you can summarize away, and I'll follow along with the comic pages.
Yeah, so, before I do a story beat by beat recap, let's just kind of talk about the setup, which is that it's
Sure.
1912, and Adolf Hitler is staying with his brother Alois and his sister-in-law Bridget in Liverpool. And so what we're seeing is basically Adolf Hitler walking throughout Liverpool and really just having these internal monologues that are contrasted with these sounds and sights of the UK, of Liverpool. As we proceed through this shot where we see the close up of these boots with stockings within them, we have a pan out to reveal Hitler himself in a very beautiful, almost mosaic-like depiction where we have these flowers, what appear to be flowers. It could be reptilian scales, it could be fish, and we see newsprint articles plastered on them. So you get this idea of like a bricolage or some sort of art piece behind him. And this works in with the theme happening within the book, where, as in historical accuracy, Hitler actually began with the intent not to enter politics, but he wanted to be an artist. And he was not a well-received artist. He definitely was ushered out of academies and never got certain opportunities to develop skills. Some would say because of a lack of talent. Some say that's a kind of lens we like to view his works through, given the historic atrocities he helped to perpetuate and commit. But regardless of that, we start seeing this contrast already. What's very interesting about this book, as we see Hitler at the table with his family, and they're having this engagement of discussing familial matters, day-to-day quotidian things, we already start getting the sense of the surreal in there. The family starts talking to one another, his sister-in-law and brother-in-law, and I should say, and they're talking about how he ends up sometimes claiming there's people singing in his room. And then there's Morrissey of the Smiths singing Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now inside of his closet. And we're already getting this first view into the absurdity and kind of, how can I say, anachronistic elements that are going to happen in here. I think this pays off really well. And one thing I do want to mention is already we're seeing a parallel between Hitlerism and Thatcherism, because that song in particular by the Smiths and so much of their music was very politically motivated regarding the ascendancy of the right in the UK. And a lot of their songs were very political, talking against that. And so we're seeing this contrast where this song, which is about kind of the futility of trying to find meaning in Thatcher's England, is contrasted with Hitler opening this closet door, literally a portal
Hmm.
to something that, as the book is going to point out, his efforts somewhat indirectly lead to. But through this, we get more of this dynamic between Hitler and this family. His one relative, who is, I believe his name is Eloise, if
Hmm.
unless I'm mistaken, is obsessed with safety razors. He basically is going on this like great rant about how safety razors are going to be the future of
Hmm.
Europe, and you are going to dominate if you invest in safety razors, which is interesting. Um, as we go on, we do see Hitler. He's very self-effacing, and he really is just kind of scrutinizing himself, scrutinizing the world as well. We get some internal monologue, which is interesting because you do get a glimmer where there's a sense of sympathy that maybe the narrator is having with this character, while at the same time it's also pointing out the absurdity of his thought and some
Hmm.
contradictions. Um, but as the story goes on, we see more interactions between Eloise and Hitler too. There's this very chilling sequence which you actually had just pulled up. I believe
Oh,
it's actually a few pages back. Yeah, where
okay, okay.
after talking about the history of, or sorry, the proposed historical impact these safety razors are going to have on Europe. On the next page, Hitler is drinking a cup of tea, saying, I have a vision too, with this spattering of blood red behind him, and it's very chilling. So even in the
Hmm.
midst of having this sort of sympathetic view and this extension of humanism extended to this character, we still have this underlying sense of we know what he's going to do. We know what history eventually will reveal him as. Uh, Anyway, he goes out into the street, and we have basically a lot of internal monologues and decisions that are coming through the story. Hitler is trying to debate what does he want to do with his future? Does he want to continue to pursue the arts? Does he want to enter politics, or does he want to enter into business? He enters into a establishment to order something, and thankfully he's able to speak in German, so he does communicate with someone who's serving him there, and he proceeds to continue having visions, visions that are of the past, apocalyptic visions. Again, I think really underscoring an idea of where Hitler will eventually be as a real life figure. And the comic ends with him sitting alone, drinking tea by himself in England. He, I actually like this quote, and I just want to say this correctly. In England, one learns to drink a great deal of tea as he sits by himself. And that's how that issue ends. Um, I just want to comment that the art throughout this is incredible. We can talk
Hmm.
about how originally this was intended to be black and white. And I think you can see in some panels that holding true, but the use of color, particularly on this page, is so powerful. Whether it's the fiery background of the scene of the crucifix, the uh, sanguine bread behind the cup that's gathering blood, how that contrasts to the splash that's entering the teacup that Hitler is looking into. And we do see this kind of contrast between him looking into the teacup, like reading tea leaves. Is he looking for a future that he wants? Is he looking to the past to try to find an identity for what to do? And we contrast that with the portal of him looking into the closet and seeing Morrissey singing to him as an actual portal into the future. And all these things create this sort of postmodern view of what is shaping this man to become such a historical figure and such a horrible figure of history. But in the end, as I said, presented with this idea that you're going to have a story where the protagonist is Hitler, you're mainly going to come into this assuming this is going to be a joke, this is going to be an edgy sort of comic, and yet we get a very humane and oddly nuanced comic so far with it. What do you think about it so far, Mike?
I absolutely love it. It's taken me a long time to realize. I think the closest creator, the creator that works the closest in the style of Grant Morrison is David Lynch.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, I don't know why it only occurred to me very recently, but I remember after seeing, I don't know if it was Mulholland Drive or it might have been Lost Highway, but I realized my take, and I'll tie this up in a minute. My take on the way that David Lynch's stories work is they're like a Mobius strip, right? Like they don't have a logical structure, but they do tie together, right? A Mobius strip only has two dimensions; it doesn't have three, apparently. Although I still can't quite understand it. But something like this story right here, on the surface, it might appear to just be absurdity and strangeness for the sake of strangeness, but I do think everything is intentional.
Mhm.
And not to say that I even quite understand how everything ties together, but even the man singing in singing in his closet. I'm not a huge like I do like the Smiths, but I'm not an expert at all. I don't know anything about their music. So even what you're telling me is illuminating the subtext of that, and then combined with John Lennon singing in the wardrobe later, you know, it is more of a clue that there's more of that's going on than just being absurd and being funny. And
Mhm.
here, tying this in with the legend of Joseph of Arimathea, and then saying, he says, I believe that the Holy Grail is still here somewhere, disguised as a teacup. It's only a matter of time before I find it. In
I'm glad
England,
you
when
brought that up
yep,
because I forgot about that. That's going to be a continuing motif that Hitler is trying to find, essentially, whether it's symbolic or literal, the Holy Grail in Liverpool. And this is part of what he's pursuing in Liverpool. So it adds another surreal element to this. And like you said, when that Lynchian vibe, you do get that sense of surreality where in a way it makes sense in the universe, but even the rules of the universe itself doesn't really allow this to exist in it. And so that's the type of tension I think I see happen in Lynch movies and his television shows, and I'm seeing here. And that absurdity works so well. And not to spoil where it's going to end off, we'll get to that eventually, but it's such a great payoff by the end of the comic run.
mm-hmm. And that's the thing is that with Grant Morrison, I've always, I mean, I'm not sure about you, but one of the things about his comics is about their comics is most people will agree that they're confusing.
Mhm.
However, I always find they're better on a second run, on a second read, and
Mhm.
ultimately they do make sense. Even if they don't make perfect sense, you don't understand everything, they do fit together, I find.
I agree with
So,
that. I
yeah.
think there's a certain impression they leave that is so much more satisfying than a concise, traditional, or let's say superhero narrative, for lack of a better example, because we talk a lot about
Hmm.
superhero narratives. There's something that defies convention so much that it becomes more satisfying because I think it's more engaging. You get challenged by it in a way that you don't necessarily do with a more mainstream writer handling, let's say, superhero material, and then you go to see Grant Morrison's run on JL, Justice League, or let's say even Animal Man, and what you end up getting is something so much richer.
Hmm. And as far as like parallels with their other work, I felt this was closest to Doom Patrol.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And even like this little like theme or running subplot of the where is it here? When he's talking about the hairy ears. Oh, here it is. Uh and how do you pronounce the name?
I
Aloy?
believe it's Eloise.
Eloise.
Yeah.
Eloise has hairy ears. I covet them. Do you remember the Beard Hunter in Doom? Oh, it was, yeah, Doom Patrol. Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
It's just this we it's absurd and it's funny, but there's something to it, I think. I don't know. I just love it. I love it.
Yeah. We should also mention something I neglected, which is that at this point in his life, Hitler's unemployed. He's living with these extended relatives in Liverpool.
Hmm.
They're pressuring him to try to find work, and he's not really doing it because he's acting as a bit of a dilettante. He's a failed art student, and he's debating about getting back into this creative field or exploring if there's something else. He has this fantastical idea of finding the Holy Grail mixed with this soul searching he's doing, where he is looking at himself as a scrawny, almost emaciated figure in the mirror, and he's looking at his relative and just going, "Oh, if only I had like that ear hair." It sounds ridiculous, but
Uh-huh.
you do have this thing where he feels emasculated. There's some degree of which his humanness feels depleted, and it raises some interesting questions about maybe the nature of why certain people enter into ascendancy of tyrannical or fascist rule, almost as if they're trying to compensate for something they feel they're missing. I know that's a very juvenile, very puerile way of reading it, but there's something to that in this particular story. And I think this one it goes into interesting places rather than just Donald Trump is a man baby, and that's why he's running the
Right.
country the way he is.
And also Grant Morrison is doing this in a way that it is, like I said, you're laughing at it, but it also is addressing exactly what you're talking about. It's an
Mhm.
absurd way to depict that type of behavior, I guess you could say, and it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, and just quickly before we go to the next issue, the art is incredible. I think the
Yes.
compositions of these shots, even the four panels that you have right now, they show these different perspectives within the room of his extended family as they watch him depart. Then we have that very snowy, washed out color for him just walking in the middle of the snowy street. But that pattern that we have on the walls, the wallpaper patterns are just incredibly done and painted in there in a way
Hmm.
where we talk about this a lot, but comics coming out of a certain era when they use techniques to have those, I guess you could say, gratuitous patterns in them, you don't see that with modern digital manipulation just because it doesn't look as well processed using a digital means of reiterating this. Like this is, I forget the exact technique, but this would be manually done. They would overlay what they illustrated over these patterns to get that effect.
Right. And I don't know what it's called either, but yeah, that's a good point. Even with the bottom panel here, with this kind of it's probably like a watercolor or something, but it's meant to create
Hmm.
like the sky and the ground, but it's very effective. And Steve Yeowell did Invisibles, correct?
Oh, I believe so, yes.
Okay. I do think this, I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because he's inking himself here, but I do like this better. I think this is really good. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I'm refamiliarizing myself with what else he did. I know a lot of 2000 AD. You'll probably like this. He started on Spider-Man and Zoids.
wow, which we've covered on this podcast. Interesting.
Yes.
It's been a while. Jeez. Anyway. Okay, so we should probably get to the next chapter, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
we'll get to
let's.
issue number 47. This time not featuring a cover from anything from this particular story, so I don't think it's worth addressing.
No, you're right.
Mhm.
Okay, so you want me to jump in here? Oh, wait a
Yes,
minute.
and you're
Sorry.
here. This is the proper issue.
Is it? No, but it says part four. That can't be right.
It is because what happened was the original issue, and I wanted to touch upon this.
Ah,
The multi-part series they wanted to do were just going to be shorter comics. So you're actually going to notice technically this is a 12-part comic, even though it's run over four issues. So consider these more chapters than anything. But
hmm,
basically at this part, this is where Morrison, from what I read, started expanding, and you're going to see the story from this point go into a much more surreal bent, even compared to what we saw before. I think because Morrison really decided what they wanted to do going forward with the introduction of what I think is arguably the most important character in this series outside of the title character, which is going to be John Bull. But I'll let you explain how he's introduced and where we go from
sure.
here.
And we should also point out, maybe we should, well, I mean, for those that don't know, Grant Morrison is Scottish.
Yes.
So this is being written from the point of view of someone. And when I was younger and more naive, I used to think that they were a willing participant in the United Kingdom. But the older I get, the more I realize that's not the way they see it, or at least some people, some Scottish people don't see it, right? They
Mhm.
consider themselves a colonized country, and so this is a depiction of the personification of England by a Scottish creator. So John Bull would be like the equivalent of Uncle Sam, right? But for England. So
Exactly. And I think even more so, just before you do the recap, consider John Bull the personification of Imperial England. And I think that's
sure,
the best way to understand what this character is supposed to represent.
right. So continuing from the last chapter, Adolf is sitting enjoying his tea. John Bull comes in right away and says, Kraut, are you? So they start talking, and he calls him out as being German and introduces himself, and they sit down and have a casual conversation. And again, this is something I didn't think we were going to get, but I mean, okay, so again, politics, what's it called? Like a subtext here. So he's got this bull, this what is it called? A dog.
Yeah, a
Is it
bulldog. Yeah.
a bulldog, which is I'm not sure. Is this the official like national animal of England? I don't know.
Not really, but people
Okay,
kind of treat it as such. Um, but it still represents an idea of
sure.
England. What's supposed to be vicious and tough, and
Right.
coded as masculine. So you can extrapolate the correlation between the bulldog and John Bull's character from there.
Right.
Yeah.
So he puts the bulldog on the table and says that he's got the squirts. And then of course we see through the art this dog is making a mess on the like the apron, whatever it's called, of the whatever that's called.
Yeah,
Of
the tablecloth on
the
the table.
tablecloth,
Yeah.
yes. And John Bull starts to talk about how the bloody country's gone to the dog since Victoria died, and is basically saying that they need to kind of get back to the way things were before. In the meantime, he's checking out the waitress, and then kind of leans over and is like, "So you want to be a tyrant? Eh? You want to be a dictator? Well, you come to the right place then, my lad." Now again, um, as you mentioned earlier, he's tying in Thatcherism with Hitlerism, and also something that I'm only now starting to think about, which is the point of view of England from the point of view of a Scottish person. So I think that's what we're seeing here. But I'll leave my comments to the end. So then John Bull mentions that he's got some pamphlets printed out. Um, oh, and then Adolf notices that they're in German. And then he says, well, some ideas are the same in any language, some smells too, excuse my farting. And then we cut to this wide shot and we see that the dog has made a complete mess of the table. And then we cut, and then now John Bull is gone. So, so is this, see, now this is where it gets confusing. Did the first issue split it up into parts? I didn't notice that.
It did, very subtly though. So
Okay,
that's probably why you missed it. Yeah. This
okay,
is much
okay,
more pronounced than it will be going forward. Yeah.
okay. So now, again, like let's give Grant Morrison credit for being hilarious, but now we cut to a scene of Adolf Hitler sitting on a toilet and narrating about constipation. I was born to suffer. There's no end to it. I was born to suffer, and I shall surely die here on this miserable English toilet. So then he comes out, um, and oh, sorry. So John Bull's not gone. So he comes back outside, and I guess this is a continuation of the scene, right? So John Bull's still there. They're still talking, and John Bull's still talking about basically tyranny and revolution with Hitler, and he's talking about the constipation. And I don't remember what else they talk about here. They mentioned Ireland. Here, so this is yeah. So then they mention here. Don't forget your pamphlets. It's all in here. In here, Ireland in 1797, Peterloo in 1810, India, North Africa in the Boer War. We've tortured and tyrannized more mixed proles and darkies than you've had shits, my lad. So yeah, things are getting pretty targeted here. It's all in fun. Anybody who can't see that's got something wrong with them. So you're off then, eh? So then he decides to he decides to clock Adolf Hitler and throw. Basically, he punches him, and Adolf flies through the window. But the artwork is so understated that it's not like a Jack Kirby comic or The Matrix where he just goes flying. It's just like he's horizontal and then he's just laying on the ground. It doesn't say anything. We should mention Adolf Hitler is remarkably passive throughout all of this stuff, right?
Hmm. Because he appears tortured. He appears to be very self-pitying. This is
Uh,
not the fiery tyrant that, we're accustomed to through historical records, but,
right.
this is still what we're being depicted. And I love the absurdity of that scene too, because as you said, it's anti-kinetic. The scene where you actually see Hitler basically just planking through the glass of the door,
Uh,
it's muted in these earth tones and these very muted color palettes. So there's almost a weird contrast where, as punctuated as it is by it, there's something very understated at the same time. And then we do see the window no longer shattered in the next view when Hitler looks back over his shoulder. So we are again getting an emphasis that John Bull, he might be a phantasmagorical character, maybe something that
Right.
transcends time and reality, or this could be some figment of Hitler's imagination. And that's the interesting ambiguity about this.
And I love this. Perhaps England has something to offer me after all. I'm no longer entirely certain about a career in painting. It's great. It's great. So then now we're in part 6, and we get a scene of Adolf with his, I guess this would be his niece or nephew,
Hmm.
Patrick. So they're kind of going back and forth, and he's talking with his, is this his sister or his sister-in-law?
It should
His
be his,
sister.
I believe his sister. The exact relations, I keep going back on it, and I
Mhm.
apologize. Just for our listeners, we should be a little bit more consistent with it. Uh, just so we know, it is his brother, Eloise, and his
Okay.
sister-in-law, Bridget. So it's his sister-in-law. So
Okay.
we'll just emphasize that so we know it's his brother and sister-in-law going forward for clarity.
And then he's also narrating as he's playing with this little baby, and he's like, "When I am dictator of Europe, one of the first things I will insist on is the young men of Austria and Germany return to the wearing of national costume." And again, it's if you're a Grant Morrison fan, it's an absurd line, but it also is accurate to what we know about Adolf Hitler, right? So
Hmm.
it's skirting the line there for sure. And that's part of why I love Grant Morrison. Pardon me. So then Adolf Hitler leaves, and then he ends up going to. Oh yes, okay, I remember this now. So now he's taught. Now is it now he's talking to his brother, right?
That's right. And this is the interesting part where we get almost a parallel of the ambition Hitler would have politically. Eloise's brother, he has an ambition too. He wants to essentially create what he is convincing his brother to be the Hitler International, which is his empire of registered safety razors. That's what he's
Right.
trying to get his brother to do.
Uh-huh. It's great. And so he's like, oh, look at this. You know, he shows him he's got this map of Europe, and he's showing him. Um, he's like, I will consolidate my position. I will personally drill it and instruct armies of crack salesmen and send them out to the four corners of the continent. Hitler International. And so they're looking at this map, and then Hitler. Why does he get upset here? He's like,
A
I don't
basic
remember.
Basically, he's feeling like his brother is not giving him enough ambitious things. He calls him a cheap dauber, and then
Hmm.
Hitler just ends up flying off the handle with that, saying, "I am a man of vision, Eloise, and let me tell you the way to seize a country." And then he proceeds to, in very unambiguous terms, describe what will inevitably happen with the ascendancy of the Third Reich, which his brother scoffs off. He just says, "That's like it." Uh, and as Hitler leaves the room in this great anticlimax of a final joke, because he's torn the map in his frustration, his brother goes, "And you owe me a map."
Yeah. Um, okay, I gotta say one thing. First of all, I love this that he actually lays out what he says here. He says, one, weaken and then destroy the influence of the Marxist trade unions. Two, create and maintain a healthy middle class by encouraging small traders and personal enterprises. Three, seize control of the media. So and then four, unquestioned authority, the politically centralized parliament. That's my plan. And there's no exaggeration there. That's almost literally what Hitler's plan was. I love the fact that it just ends with his brother saying, "You're an idiot, Adolf, and you owe me a map."
Mhm.
I don't know. I just gotta say, I love that.
There's a lot to unpack with this particular chapter. And, obviously, we're seeing this interesting parallel where he's laying out ambition that he just doesn't want to be a salesman. He is definitely laying the groundwork of what the the National Socialism movement, which would eventually morph into Nazism, were intending to do. But what I find very fascinating is the role of John Bull. And this is why I said I think he's, outside of Adolf Hitler, the most important character in this. as he's performing this rant about the great days of England, of their empire, of all these different nations and peoples that were put under their thumb, what you're really seeing is England has set the blueprint for other types of political ascendancy and political oppression. What we're really seeing is through the empirical rule and expansion of England, we see a precedent for what's going to happen for future types of tyrants, including what will happen in Nazi Germany. And what's particularly eye-opening, and I think can only really be told through the point of view of someone who's not married to a sort of nationalist ideology, like as you said, Grant Morrison is Scottish and definitely is a person who has been very critical over British nationalism. They're bringing up a point, and the point is, as much as the British patted themselves on the back for fighting the Nazis and fighting for freedom, they were the largest tyrants in the history of the world at one point. And for that, Grant Morrison is pointing out the fallacy of this thought that people are self-congratulatory that they were the good guys. They fought the Nazis. They fought the all-evil oppressor of Adolf Hitler. And yet in the ascendancy at this time is Margaret Thatcher and the far right and their own policies that would exclude immigration, that cracked down on people who were trying to find asylum in the UK, and especially against those who were queer or of same-sex orientation for their relationships, where that was illegalized. And homosexuality was, for all lack of a better term, illegalized in the UK. It continued to be at that point, especially with the onset of the AIDS crisis that was occurring in the 1980s. So the parallels here are very purposeful. This isn't a story that's meaning to be apologetic for Hitler or humanize him. No, that would be gross. And that's not what Morrison's doing. Morrison's pointing out the hypocrisy of a people who congratulate themselves for not being Hitler, for not being Nazis, and their own behavior and history reflecting a lot of that same tyrannical fascist history.
And again, an idea that did not occur to me when I was younger, but is slowly starting to occur to me more and more as I get older. Absolutely. I'll leave it at that. So I guess we're jumping to number 48, right?
We are. So this cover is kind of amusing, although I think, again, it misrepresents the tone of what we're going to read. It's obviously a play on Mr. Hulot's Holiday, like the famous French comedy. But we do see Hitler on a bicycle with a little hat on. I don't believe he actually looks like this or rides a bicycle in this issue. I might be mistaken. It had been a few days since I've read this. But let's find out together. Oh, before I do mention anything, what do you think about the cover itself?
Oh, I absolutely love it. Just love it. Again, this completely straight-faced. If you didn't know that this was like an absurdist, almost comedy, you just think, oh, this is just a great, nice picture. It's great. I don't know. I love it.
And I think there's also something about how innocuous it is, because it is referencing what could be argued relatively innocent French film, a little bit of a naive comedy with this historical barbarous character. So there is like that dark humor about it too.
Okay,
we should probably just, unless you have anything to say, I'll go through, I'll recap what happens in this issue. But it actually starts with a point that you made, a reference earlier to yet another songwriter, John Lennon, as he's reciting lyrics to Working Class Hero. Hitler opens up his wardrobe, the portal to this future world, and he sees this sight, a song that's very much against a type of proto or fascist adjacent ideology. The song is a screed against that. And again, there's the irony of Hitler looking into this. But anyway, as that happens, we're seeing the story beats continue. Hitler is by himself, and he's really debating what he wants to do. Does he want to enter into industry? Does he want to continue pursuing arts? Or is there something to this idea of entering into politics? We get some more character background on him as well, including instances of abuse by his father, which I think is very fascinating. Again, some might argue this perhaps dangerously leads to creating sympathy for Hitler. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's important to realize people come from a disparate range of backgrounds, and the things that inform their political and personal ideologies vary. And
Hmm.
you can have someone who's a victim of a type of parental abuse who comes out to be what we would consider to be a very moral person. And then we'll
Hmm.
have an Adolf Hitler. But I think this does inform and underscore some of the psychological building and the profile that we're building for this character through Grant Morrison's writing. Uh, but as we go on, we find out another aspect of Hitler's personality, which is he also no longer just believes in looking for art as giving him meaning. He believes in signs and portents and horoscopes. So he's going to a medium. So the medium actually reads his fortune, and through this we see the ascendancy of the Third Reich through what she's predicting. She gives a lot of clues and vagaries indicating this dark future. And in the humorous twist, an element that only Grant Morrison can perform, she keeps saying, but you have to shave that mustache. That mustache is so unruly. You really have to trim it up. No one's going to take you seriously with that walrus mustache. And there's something about that where it's such a superficial element, but it's almost the dots being connected in this universe where there's all these anachronisms. It's as if saying, this is the linchpin. When you do this symbolically, we'll know you have come to the part where you're ready to be the historical figure of Adolf Hitler.
Hmm. That's a good point.
And it is also very humorous too, because there's even a
Hmm.
panel where she goes, just don't forget to shave your mustache. That's the really important thing.
Uh-huh.
It's so absurd, but
Right.
it's there. There's a wonderful shot that you're even showing where Hitler is looking side-eyed at a cat that had jumped on a document that they were looking at earlier. Again, I think imbuing the predatory nature of a cat along with what Hitler is, because neither, I'm saying predatory, but it's more scavenger style.
Hmm.
And I think that's an indication that we might see, uh, arguably symbolically through Hitler's behavior politically future in the future. But anyway, that screed aside, we then cut to what will be Christmas, and Hitler's brother and his sister-in-law are quote unquote celebrating, but really just his extended family are. And Hitler is just brooding that he has no money, he cannot buy presents. All he has to offer is illustration of a cathedral. This mirrors what we see in the opening shot of this comic in general, of the first shot we see of a cathedral and Hitler's feet walking next to it. And we also see here, whether intended or not, it's a very rough sketch. It doesn't look like necessarily that much effort or skill went
Hmm.
into this. I wonder if that's a little dig at the failed art career of Hitler himself, because we never actually saw examples of his art depicted in this comic so far. This is it. And you even get this feeling of being underwhelmed as his sister-in-law goes, "Oh, it's lovely, Adolf. Very lifelike. Thank you."
Hmm.
It's you get that sense where it's not that much of an appreciated gift.
Right, right.
And in another great symbolic moment, Hitler provides back the map to his brother that he had torn. He's saying, I repaired the map, and yet it's crudely adhered together with tape, blocking out aspects of some of the topography. And I think in its own way, this shows perhaps the fractured nature of Europe that Hitler will eventually engender with the ascendancy of the Third Reich, and also how patchwork his attempts to unify the German people and Europe itself would be. Perhaps I'm reading a bit too much into it, but I do
No, you
feel
could be
there is
right.
some correlation you could find
Hmm.
with that. But with that said, there's an ensuing fight, and then Adolf leaves the building. He goes back to his quarters where he shaves, and as per the instruction of the medium, we now see he has shaved his mustache down. He has completed the transformation and continues his search for the Holy Grail in Liverpool.
Hmm. I've got to say that map thing is brilliant, I think.
Yeah.
And even the even the fact that the way that the reaction, how dare you insult me this way? And you're not only me, but our country. Your days are numbered, Adolf. You mark my words. I'm not a calendar, Elois. And as far as I'm concerned, tape is a fine gift. You will live to regret your scorn. Merry Christmas. So really, all he gave him was tape because the map was his. It's just so insulting. And, never mind the absurdity of everything else that we've covered in the story. The imagination to even use that as a way to just be like a big screw you to his brother is just brilliant, I think.
I agree. And something I also really enjoy is that I've said a couple times there could be a risk of generating sympathy for Adolf Hitler in the course of this, because there are certainly a lot of humanizing aspects to his character that are portrayed. But then we also see the selfishness, we see the monomania, we see the greediness, and we see this very insecure person who, in all accounts, yes, you can see him being bullied, you can see him being a victim of family abuse, but you also see him being a little shit, for lack of a better term. And I think that creates enough dissonance where the sympathetic elements allow you to see maybe how psychologically Hitler developed into the type of person that would end up being the leader of the National Socialist. And yet at the same time, we create enough distance with this sort of sniveling aspect of his personality, with this duplicitousness that he demonstrates, where we can't quite empathize with him. We can certainly sympathize with the situation he's undergone and understand a better idea of how he developed into how he became this person, but we're not exactly going for Hitler.
By the way, I wanted to point out a little fun fact I know about Hitler. When France signed the what was it called? Like when they won World War One. What was it called? You remember the famous thing where they signed on the train? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. Was it the Treaty of Versailles?
Yeah, well, I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. So when Hitler invaded France, he made, I'm not sure who it was, the president or the general, sign, basically surrender France. He used the same train in the same area, basically as a big, like a petty, I've been planning this for 20 years and now you're going to do it. But he didn't even wait for him to sign. He just the guy started to sign, he just got up and walked away because he was so badass. And that pettiness is what we're seeing right here. And I love it. And I don't know if that's what Grant Morrison was thinking, but it's like you said, this is where we're starting to see the Adolf that we know, right? It's happening here. It's great.
When I am sure this will get some flaming and some horrible comments, but when you think about people who fall under the thrall of the manosphere, for example, I think it's really interesting where if you read about any of these individuals, the more well-known individuals, you kind of see disrupted childhoods. You see very horrible events happening to them at an early age. And I think it creates a feeling of sympathy for an individual to say, yes, it's horrible you encountered these situations. I can understand why you grew bitter and why this was so traumatizing. But to manifest it in such misogyny and hatred and oftentimes xenophobia, that's the unforgivable thing. And I think it's so fascinating to show these plights that Hitler had encountered in his youth, the kind of rejection of his idea that he was going to be an artist, the implications of familial abuse, and to say, but he still did this stuff. I find that fascinating because, as I said, it sets a path to where he's going to go without making you necessarily feel bad for him, because he's given opportunities to get off this path. That's something else we should mention throughout the course of this book, whether it's his brother offering him a chance to join him in this endeavor to sell these razor blades. It's not glamorous, but it will give him a future. It's going to give him employment, whereas he's currently unemployed. There are people indicating that he could have chances to get out away from this path he's heading down, and yet he continues to head down this path. Quite literally, the opening sequences of this comic is him walking down a path, and I think that is maybe the course of it. It's not saying feel bad for Hitler, it's saying we can see how he developed this bitterness, but I don't care how bad of a childhood Andrew Tate had, there's nothing forgivable about what he ends up doing. And
exactly.
Yeah.
I'll agree with you on that. Okay, so now we're in the last issue, right?
Yeah,
49.
this is it. Yeah.
And this is
And
not, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say this is not related to the comic, but I do like this cover a lot. I just want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good cover. But yeah, we're gonna jump right in. And so now, oh, so now he's still talking with his brother. His brother's lecturing about not being interested in the razor business that he kind of offered him. So then he says, so then Adolf says that he's leaving for the evening. Hold on a sec here. And he's going off. Hold on a sec here. Sorry. It's funny because I admit that I'm like nice man. I'm actually terrible at summarizing. I know that you're better at it, but I'm doing my best here. I
That's
just
a
read
high
this.
praise, but I don't know
Yeah,
about that.
yeah.
Thank you.
It's funny. I just read this today and I don't remember what he's doing here.
Well,
Um,
he's looking for the Grail, but
right.
I'll jump in because I want to talk about
Yeah,
the
sure.
sequence. Because
Okay.
every issue has some sort of anachronistic thing that happens. Maybe he's seeing Morrissey singing in his wardrobe or John Lennon, or he ends up having a vision of John Bull and a visage of Margaret Thatcher appears. But here, a trolley is passing him by. He's having a panic attack, and what's happening are the people on the trolley are singing a little song to him. And what does that
Yes.
song happen to be? Hitler, Hitler has only got one ball, which is a song a lot of UK soldiers would sing on the battlefields as kind of like an insult to the leader of the Nazi regime.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that. I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's this line of them going, "How do they know?" Which
Hmm.
is it's funny, but
It's
it also
hilarious.
shows this time travel element which is happening, which might be real, might be
Hmm.
not. It's never really made clear. Spoilers, it's not quite made clear.
Hmm.
But it's just fantastically done. And there's this great sequence where it appears someone is stepping down on a pair of chairs, almost as if there's some sort of sandal. It's a really interesting image that I never have quite seen done before. I think it's quite amazing. And I almost wonder, in its own way, if this is meant to evoke that sort of Japanese sandal with the elongated wooden spoke, the
Sure.
exact type of clog I don't remember the name of. If this is a reference to the union or the type of collaboration that Japan and Germany would have during the Second World War, I'm not quite clear. That might be stretching it a little bit, but otherwise, I'm failing to see what this could allude to. It's the only thing I could really come up with, though.
Interesting. No, I would not have thought of that. That's great. So and so yeah, and so that basically was like another, like you mentioned, another surreal scene. So then he goes on and he hears voices singing, and it's John Bull. Oh, sorry, that's the end of that. But yeah, John Bull appears at the end of this chapter, and then jumping into part 11, now he's talking with John Bull again. And um he basically is like, I've come and go as I please, and any bugger who tries to stop me gets a fist in the gob and a rocket up his jacksie. So yeah, there's definitely some pointed criticism at Imperial England in this scene, right?
Mhm.
And he's talking about the Holy Grail again, um, and he's basically egging Adolf on. Oh, I love this scene. So he's bringing him to what he's building up as the Holy Grail, and then when they finally come into the next room, we see that he's like, there it is, the Holy Grail, and we see that it's a toilet that's overflowing with feces. This is awesome. And and then Hitler's narrating, he's like, the stench is abominable. The air is choked with bloated, buzzing flies, but I must not falter now. And then he goes and this is like train spotting. He sticks his hand and he's like, at last, I understand. I understand. And then on the next page, um, he's like, he gets found out, right? This is like the owner of the bar comes and kicks him out. So now he's out on the street. He's like, don't let me see your makey face around here again. And so again, like you said, was that really John Bull? Was he there? Because we see the toilet's empty now. Is it the same toilet? Was it his imagination, right?
Mhm.
So then he go. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just for the symbol of the toilet itself, like obviously we're looking at his pursuit of something which is shit. And, you can just say
Yeah.
that and leave it there. But you have a type of anti-baptism happening where instead of cleansing himself with water, which is a lot of similar imagery that you have with liquid being contained in the Holy Grail, you have fetid excrement. You have this contamination rather than this clarity or this cleansing of sin. You have him in this anti-baptism where he immerses himself in the worst fetid remains of the Imperial Empire of England. And thus he ascends, and we have that shot of him with all those planes overhead and the rising red sun as well. Yeah, it's very haunting, and you get this idea that if the first part of this sort of transformation of him becoming who Adolf Hitler would be known as historically was with the shaving of the mustache, this is the final ascendancy of it. This, as I said, this sort of horrendous mockery of a baptism which occurred. And I think it's such a powerful scene. I just want to touch upon that.
No, you're right. It's great. It's great. Um, so then part 12, what an anticlimax is the title, is the title. I love that. So then so now he's walking and he's with his brother and his sister-in-law again, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. And so now he's basically told them that he's going back to Germany. And so he's getting on the train and he's talking with his brother and again, like earlier in this, from the very first chapter, he said, "I'm going to be famous," right? He's talked about his destiny, and now he's like, "Don't worry, when I'm famous, you'll get back what you're owed." And so he's still on that same through line, right? And then his brother says, "Well, if we're lucky, we'll never see him again." And then he's thinking, as he's he's on this train, he's kind of just narrating in his head, and we're getting some of his thoughts. People are like dogs. England is a country of dogs, and he's going on and on. He's talking with the Grail. I have learned a great deal from my time in England. I have not learned the language, it's true, but as John Bull reminded me, some ideas are the same in any language. What a brilliant line! I love that. Ideas wear many guises and dress in many uniforms, but underneath they are always the same. The trick is to be able to recognize them. And I'm not going to read the whole page, but he goes on, and basically it concludes with now he's hearing singing in a church, and he's going along. He's like, "Others may take up my work, others may finish what I have begun, but it will be my signature there in the corner, Adolf Hitler." An allusion to the fact that he's like a failed artist, right?
Hmm.
And then I love that. Then it just ends. He's like, "Oh yes, I will." He says, "Behind me, England sinks beneath the horizon. Ahead of me, Germany is waiting. My destiny is waiting. Will I be back? Oh yes, I'll be back." It's great. It's a great ending. I love it.
Yeah. Again, I think people who just hear about this might assume, without perhaps any knowledge of Grant Morrison's previous writing, or even with some, perhaps they would go, yes, this is a story about Hitler where they're the protagonists of the story. It's going to be shock value. It's going to be bad humor. It's going to be tasteless edginess. And yet it's so much more profound and such a great story beyond those sort of confines. And even though Morrison themselves said during the time of creating this that they didn't necessarily believe in this theory that Hitler had stayed in Liverpool for a period of time before his rise with the National Socialist Party, there is still this idea of, well, how does history influence future tyrants? Again, I said this point earlier, but I think it's worth repeating. Morrison was very critical of this generation that defined themselves of their greatness based upon fighting the Nazis, given the history of England and their own empirical rule and the type of far right political direction the country itself was heading in. And, you know, I don't think anyone is going to be obtuse to this. We're seeing this now. We see the ascendancy of the right in multiple places, which in its own way makes this a more important story than I think even at the time it was written.
Mm-hmm.
It's profound, it's powerful. And for those who might be on the fence about it, no, this does not sympathize, nor does this make Hitler to be some sort of protagonist that we follow and want to succeed. We see the monster Hitler's going to become. As I said, there's that anti-baptism where he fully becomes that monster that will enact all these horrible things. And yet at the same time, we have this perfectly planned out story where we see how, for lack of a better term, a pathetic failure of a human being can be molded into one of history's greatest monsters. And I think it's a great warning piece for that reason. I think in terms of the postmodern techniques of its anachronisms, it's brilliant. Yeah, Morrison is one of, especially at this time, was one of the greatest comic writers who was ever committing pen to paper. And yeah, yet Yeowell's art does great service to the script as well. This is something I was not anticipating to say. Of all the comics we've read so far for this podcast, I think this is my favorite.
Okay, I'm going to add to that. I think this is one of Grant Morrison's absolute best comics. And I thought that I've read a lot of Grant Morrison's comics, but I think from doing this podcast, we've read things that I hadn't read before that I thought were really good. And there was one other one we'd read that I thought was one of his best, and I can't remember
Was
which.
it Saint Swithin's Day?
That was it.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that comic is like a perfect little mini story, and I feel the same way about this. I think this is perfectly executed, but also the idea is so potent. It deserves to be more widely read. It deserves to be seen by more people. And it's like you said, like Grant Morrison is not just a brilliant comics writer. They're one of the most, in my opinion, important writers that I've come across, not just in comics, in any medium. And this, if this was a TV show that was streaming on Netflix or something, I think everybody would be talking about it. I think it's brilliant. I really do.
Absolutely. We talk about this sometimes, and it's so hard in our circles because we know people who love comics and respect comics as a very serious, well, serious is maybe not the best term to use, but as a reputable medium. And there's still a contingency of people out there who don't think that's the case. And
Right.
there's that argument of, well, who do you recommend to people who may be apprehensive about reading comics? And, there's some usual suspects we always go to. Alan Moore is a great example. You can talk about more independent writers like Chris Ware or Harvey Pekar, but Grant Morrison is one of those people who, for particular works of theirs, anyone who has any doubt about the ability of the comics medium to express serious, profound, funny, and moving stories, they are one of the top three authors and creators I would
Absolutely.
recommend to somebody. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one other thing I want to point out, a friend of mine named Jeff, I can't remember his last name. It's been a while
Close
since I
friend.
talked to him. Yeah, Jeff, close friend. He made a good point years ago. He said that he thinks that comics are actually closer to poetry than to film or novels. And as time goes by, I agree. And I think it's really important to see each comics panel as like a unit. And if you think about the words in the panel, the boxes, the panel itself on the page, it's really important to get the balance right between words and image and where everything's placed on the page. And even though I'm like you, I'm a Neil Gaiman fan, and I defend his writing to Nice Man. One of the weaknesses Neil Gaiman has is I'll notice sometimes he doesn't quite have a mastery of the balance of text and image and placement. But looking at this last page, I think this is brilliant. Just like this here. Will I be back? Then cutting over to here. Oh yes, I'll be back. And this is our final image. That's chilling. And there's not a word out of place. There's not an extra word, an extra syllable. And I think you could apply that to almost the whole book. I think it's perfectly balanced.
I can't agree more. I will say, even though we're both pretty obvious comic fans, there's Drek out there. There's stuff where we can see the medium is not done justice by certain creators. And I'm not going to say it's because of contemporary writers. Like, I think there's a lot of established stuff that's also garbage.
Right.
But when comics are done to their best, it becomes one of the most profound mediums out there. I love what your friend said about it being closer to poetry than to the film, because just like how each stanza of a poem should be able to stand on its own and have its own kind of universe of meaning, each panel can do that. Yet it's enriched by the juxtaposition, by the sequential nature of it. Yeah, this to me is one of those comics where Yeah, I haven't really read anything in a while that's really made me go, this is why I love comics. This medium
Right.
reminds me it can do something that other mediums cannot do.
Hmm.
This is one of the first times in a long time, maybe since St. Swithin's Day, not to be too much of a Grant Morrison fanboy, but
Hmm.
maybe since then where I really felt, yeah, this medium is special for a reason. And what can I say? I love this. If you're apprehensive or on the fence about reading this, considering the subject matter, don't be. As I hope we've illustrated, this is a great read. It's very profound and insightful, and I think it is one of the best comics that we've read, if not, in my opinion, the best comic we've read so far for this podcast.
I think I'm gonna have to agree with you on that. 100%. I agree. The other thing I'll say is that the more that I read of Grant Morrison, Grant Morrison's always been at least my second favorite writer. And I think as time's going on, and I've had this debate with people where I'm starting to think I'm not going to say Alan Moore, I think, is consistently great, but I think Grant Morrison might be more experimental and more esoteric and think more outside the box. I think if you were to compare the bodies of work of both of them, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. We certainly people can listen to our previous episode if they want some thoughts about Alan Moore, and maybe I was a little bit derisive at some point describing some of his work I didn't care for. But I will say, Alan Moore, I think they have been fairly consistent throughout his career. But nothing like Grant Morrison, and even lesser Grant Morrison, even if they end up writing something that I don't think is exceptional, I'll put it this way. I've rarely walked away from a Grant Morrison story, comic, graphic novel feeling dissatisfied.
Right.
And there's not a lot of writers, comics, novels, whatever, that I can say that about. So, I think that speaks volumes. Definitely, I'm more attuned to early Grant Morrison. I think there was a greater experimentation in their writing.
Yes.
I think there was a greater boldness that they were doing, even when they started going to DC and writing for Animal Man is always my linchpin. But I think even Justice League, and they did X-Men as well. I believe New X-Men.
New X-Men,
which was also excellent. It's one of those
yes.
X-Men titles I recommend to people. Yeah, I think they have just stood the test of time, and even if they're not quite at the level of New Adventures of Hitler anymore, I don't know. I still read stuff of theirs, and I'm still floored sometimes by the genius of Morrison. But anyway, that's our thoughts on this. We still have many more UK comics to go, and we're actually going to be joined by our third by Nice Man for our next episode,
which is going to be covering another Grant Morrison comic. Which will be Zenith, book 1 of 5. So there's going to be a lot of time on this podcast devoted to Zenith. I don't know exactly how we're going to spread it out. It's probably going to be 5 episodes spread out over, how long will that take us? A year? I don't even know. So it's going to be interesting. But anyway, be sure to join us next episode and every episode. Our episodes are available on YouTube and comicbooksyndicate.com. So until the next time, see you later.